This episode, we're sharing a chilling paranormal story. What makes it stand out is that the person who went through it wasn't just anyone. She's a Hong Kong actress, and what you're about to hear comes straight from her own words. The focus of tonight's story is young Jing Jing. Back in the early 1980s, she stepped into the film industry when she was just a teenager. She starred in a number of movies, and even acted alongside the legendary Leslie Cheung. For a while, people saw her as one of the rising stars of Hong Kong's entertainment scene. Later on, she married the late kung fu film director Lau Kar-leung. Lau wasn't just a director, he was a true heavyweight in Hong Kong cinema. He worked behind the scenes on classics with Jackie Chan, Sammo Hung, and Jet Li, and to this day, he's remembered as one of the great masters of the kung fu movie era. And this story begins in the summer of 1983, on a night when a sudden, violent rainstorm hit Hong Kong on June 17th. Through the night, torrents of water came rushing down the hillsides, turning the road at Repulse Bay into one long, raging stream. That night, Jing Jing was heading home with a friend. When they got to the entrance of her housing estate, the security guard didn't answer the gate, and the parking lot stayed locked. With no other choice, she pulled her black Sylvia up on the steep slope just outside. The sky was already pitch black, the sound of the rain drowning out everything. She couldn't have known that this small decision would set the stage for a tragedy the very next morning. At dawn the following day, around 6 or 7, a sudden commotion broke out inside the estate. The frantic voice of the guard echoed through the hallways. "Something's happened. There's been an accident." She grabbed her car keys and ran downstairs. What she found made her freeze. Her car was surrounded by a crowd. Foreign joggers who had stopped mid-run. Residents from the neighborhood who had all rushed over. Everyone pointing toward the rear underside of her vehicle. The rain was still pouring down the slope. And in the shadows beneath the car, a pair of pale, lifeless feet stuck out, swaying slightly with the current. Someone shouted, "Help him!" A few people tried to use a jack to raise the car, but the ground was soaked, unstable. The jack slipped under the rushing water, and with a sudden crack, the car crashed back down. The whole crowd screamed. Time dragged on. The ambulance still hadn't come. Finally, a group of policemen rushed in, together with more than 10 people. They strained and lifted the heavy black car with their bare hands. The chassis came up, and in the next second, the body was washed out from under by the force of the flood. The crowd fell silent. Everyone stared at what lay before them. The swollen, darkened body, the face twisted, unrecognizable. A man drowned, left soaking beneath a car for the entire night. It was a sight that sent shivers through everyone watching. The deceased was later identified as Yu Chun Man, a janitor at a nearby school. He had no family, living a solitary life. Jing Jing stood there in the rain, stunned. Her mind could only circle back to one thought. If I hadn't parked my car there, if I'd made a different choice last night, maybe Yu Chun Man would still be alive. She thought that selling the Sylvia, the car from the accident, would be enough to draw a line under the tragedy. For a while, she even considered donating the money from the sale to help the victim's family, but Yu had lived alone. He left behind no relatives, and so that good intention had nowhere to go. The only thing she kept was the ET car stereo. Back then, it was expensive, cutting-edge technology, the kind of stereo many car owners dreamed of. She felt it would be a waste to throw it away, so she pulled it out of the Sylvia and had it fitted into her brand new car. But that one choice seemed to open the door to a chain of eerie consequences. Not long after moving back home, the strange happenings began. Late at night, the kitchen cupboards would suddenly erupt with a violent clattering, as if unseen hands were smashing the dishes around inside. Sometimes, while she slept, Her bed would shake on its own, so violently it jolted her wide awake. At first, she tried to explain it logically. Maybe it was vibrations in the building's structure, or damp air from the rain warping the wood. But as the incidents kept repeating, growing more frequent, more intense and harder to explain away, fear crept deeper and deeper into her heart. Every time the house trembled in the dead of night, her mind went straight back to that morning. The pale, lifeless feet sticking out from beneath her car. And the question haunted her. Was Yu's restless spirit still clinging on? Or had the stereo she kept behind become some kind of conduit? But what finally forced Jing to make the decision to move out was an incident that shook her to her core. By then, she was already driving a brand new Ferrari. She had hoped that with a new car, a new chapter, she could finally leave the shadows of the past behind. Yet one evening at dusk, fate played another cruel trick on her. As her Ferrari rolled toward the slope at the entrance of her estate, the very same spot where Yu had lost his life, a sudden, heavy crack rang out from the front of the car. In the next instant, the engine went dead. The Ferrari wouldn't move another inch. When the mechanics came to inspect it, their conclusion left her stunned. The front chassis had snapped. The structural link between the frame and the engine had literally broken apart. The car was a total loss beyond repair. This Ferrari was barely 2 years old, regularly serviced, in excellent condition. For it to just break in half at the estate gate was something that made no sense at all. For most owners, it would have been baffling, maybe infuriating. But for Jing, the feeling that rose inside her was something colder, something she couldn't shake. Because this was the exact spot where Yu had died beneath her Sylvia. And she began to wonder, was there some unseen force that would never allow her to pass this place in peace? From fear to despair, she came to a hard truth. There was no way she could go on living there. This time, she had no choice but to leave. After moving out, she bought herself a fresh start, a Mazda. And yes, once again, she installed that ET stereo system inside. At first, everything seemed fine. Life felt normal again, almost ordinary. But then came the day she had to drive the long, steep road to Clearwater Bay to get to a film shoot. This road to the studio had one stretch she couldn't avoid, a long, steep downhill slope. As her Mazda reached the very top, the stereo suddenly went crazy. The stations started flicking on their own, jumping from one channel to the next. Static, shrieking noises blasted out, like some invisible hand was twisting the dial over and over again. But what happened next was even worse. The moment the car started going downhill, she realized the brakes were gone. No matter how hard she stomped the pedal, nothing happened. The car just kept picking up speed, barreling down the slope, completely out of control. She clutched the steering wheel, mind racing blank. Only one thought cut through the panic. The car in front. If I crash into it, maybe I'll stop. With no other choice, she yanked the wheel straight and slammed into the car ahead. The impact was brutal, but finally her Mazda came to a stop. She sat there shaking, heart hammering, just thankful to still be alive. But the nightmare wasn't over. The doors of the other car flew open, and a group of big men stormed out, faces full of rage. "Do you even know how to drive? You smashed into us." Their voices boomed as they marched closer, ready to explode. Then they reached the back of their car, and suddenly silence. On the rear bumper, there wasn't a single scratch from her Mazda. Instead, clear as day, was one deep dent, shaped exactly like a clenched fist. The men froze. They looked at each other. In the next instant, the men said nothing, They bolted, running in panic, jumping back into their car, and speeding off into the night. Jing Jing sat frozen, staring at their taillights as they disappeared. Her mind was buzzing. That dent in the bumper, shaped like a fist. What was it? Just some odd mark from the crash? Or something left behind by an unseen force? Inside her own car, she was trembling, her whole body cold. Deep down, she knew. This wasn't coincidence anymore. This was a haunting, a lingering presence that refused to let her go. After enduring one terrifying incident after another, she finally decided to seek help from an elderly spirit medium. This woman was known for performing what locals call a rice ritual, a kind of traditional divination. She still remembered stepping into that small house. In front of a little altar sat one single egg, and a bowl filled with plain white rice. The medium began muttering under her breath, then slowly scattered the rice across the table. Where the grains landed, how they settled, that would reveal how many spirits were present. The count was 3. The first, the woman said, was Jing Jing's late father. The second was an infant spirit. So small, so young, its faint voice whispered of being cold, saying it wanted a school bag, a uniform, the simple things of a child who never had a chance to grow up. Hearing this, Jing Jing's chest tightened with sorrow. She knew instantly who it was, the child she had lost years earlier. And then came a promise, carried on that tiny voice. One day, it would return to her. It would come back, reborn into this world. But the most chilling part was the third presence. The medium's face suddenly turned serious. She lowered her voice and said, "There's also a malevolent spirit. It refuses to step forward, and it spends its time tormenting the child. But it's made one thing clear: it wants your life." Jing Jing's face went pale. The medium paused, then added a sentence. That froze everyone in the room. "It says that within 7 days, it will take your life." In that moment, Jing Jing felt ice spread through her entire body. What had started as fear of strange disturbances had now become a very real threat of death. Even after the ritual, her mind was in chaos. She didn't dare drive anymore. Instead, she switched to taking the train. One day on a packed train, she bumped into an old friend. The moment he saw her pale face, he couldn't help but ask what was wrong. She hesitated, then finally opened up, telling him everything that had happened in recent days. The rain-soaked accident, the medium's grim warning, and the threat that her life would be taken within a week. Her friend listened quietly, then gave a small nod. "This isn't something you can handle on your own. I'll take you to see someone, Master Li." That very day, she went with him. The moment they arrived, Master Li wasted no words. He simply gestured for her to sit down. "You don't need to be afraid," he told her. "Since you've come here, I'll help you. But first, I need to prove something." He tore off a slip of blank paper and instructed her to write down 6 random characters. "Fold it up small. Don't let anyone see it," he said. She did exactly as he asked, then set the paper aside. Master Li lowered his eyes for a moment, then spoke the characters out loud. One by one, each perfectly correct. Her heart jolted, and for the first time, she truly believed this master might be exactly who he claimed to be. After that, Master Li spoke just one calm sentence. "Tonight, at 11 o'clock, come back. I will open the altar, and the one you need to face will appear." Before she left, he gave her 2 very clear instructions. First, I will not take a single cent from you. Second, you must never speak of this to the media. This is to untie a knot, not to seek fame. That night, at 11 sharp, she returned. And the first words out of Master Lee's mouth were not comfort, but warning. No matter what happens, you must not cross the incense burner and run outside. Remember, this line must not be broken. Jing Jing nodded nervously and knelt before the Buddha statue. Master Lee lit the incense and began to chant softly. The room grew quiet, the silence broken only by the faint crackle of burning incense. Then, the air grew heavy, as if something unseen was pressing down on the room. From the far corner came a rasping breath, low, harsh, filled with rage. A moment later, a figure emerged from the darkness. Its face was ashen, its body crushed flat, like a corpse pressed under unbearable weight. It was you, the school janitor who had died beneath her car. The spirit lunged forward at once, hands outstretched, clawing for her throat. She froze, her whole body rigid. Tears and snot streamed down her face, as a scream ripped from her chest. Master Lee rushed forward, chanting furiously, and with great effort forced the spirit back. "Speak to him," he commanded. Through sobs, Jing Jing cried out. "It wasn't my fault. That night the flood carried you down. You were trapped beneath my car. I never meant to hurt you." But the ghost gave no reply. It only thrashed and struggled, its guttural breathing shaking the very walls, charging at her again and again as if to rip her apart. Master Lee's forehead glistened with sweat, as he forced his voice louder in prayer, straining to hold the spirit back. At last, he growled, "His anger runs too deep. He's not going to let you go. There's only one way. Every good deed you do, you have to pass it on to him so he can finally move on." Jing Jing sobbed and nodded desperately. "I'll do it. I swear I'll do it. No matter how many years it takes. I'll keep doing good." With Master Lee's final chant, Yu's figure slowly dissolved into the rising incense smoke. Moments later, it was gone, leaving behind nothing but a silence so heavy it was hard to breathe. Master Lee told her that because you had died on a stormy night, every time the rains returned, she might still feel his presence. Not as a threat, but as a reminder that she must continue, little by little, to dedicate her good deeds to him until his soul was freed. From that day forward, Jing Jing lived not just as an actress, but as someone carrying a debt to repay. She threw herself into charity work, donating to schools, visiting the elderly, helping the lonely. The years went by. A decade later, the disturbances gradually faded. And one day, she realized she hadn't felt that cold presence in a very long time. In that moment, she finally dared to believe. You had moved on. And now, 40 years later, when she shares her story again, it isn't to scare people. It's to remind us all of one simple truth. Only compassion can bring peace to both the living and the dead.